The building stood tall, shining in the middle of the city like a monument of power. People walking inside whispered in low voices, their steps quiet, their eyes nervous. It was not just an office, it was the empire of a man everyone feared. His name was Alexander Gray, the CEO. Alexander was young compared to many powerful men, but his reputation was colder than ice. Employees called him the Heartless One. Some said he never smiled, others said he never forgave mistakes. Rumors filled every corner, that he once fired an entire department in a single day, that he walked past crying employees as if they were invisible, and that he never, ever showed kindness. He entered the office that morning with his usual silence. A black suit, a perfect tie, and eyes that carried no warmth. People straightened their backs the moment they saw him. Some lowered their heads, pretending to work harder. His presence was like a heavy storm cloud, pressing down on everyone. Inside the elevator, no one dared to speak. They simply stood there, holding their breath until the doors opened. When he walked into his private office, the air seemed to relax a little, as if the building itself was afraid of him. But why was he like this? That question floated in the mind of every employee. They had seen rich men, strict bosses, even arrogant leaders. But Alexander was different. He looked empty, as if something inside him had died long ago. He worked day and night, without rest, without joy. He never attended celebrations, never spoke of family, and never allowed personal talk during work. To him, the office was a battlefield. Mistakes were punishable, emotions were weakness, and success was the only thing that mattered. People respected his intelligence, his business talent, and his sharp decisions. But nobody loved him. Nobody dared to. The whispers spread again that day. Did you hear? He rejected another partnership deal. The company could have earned millions. That's nothing. Last week, he walked out of a charity dinner because someone asked about his personal life. Heartless man. No wonder he's alone. Yet, despite the fear and rumors, one truth remained: he was successful. The company was growing faster than ever. Clients trusted him, investors followed him, and rivals feared him. For the world outside, Alexander Gray was untouchable. But inside his office, the silence told a different story. He sat at his desk, papers neatly arranged, computer screen glowing with numbers. His hands moved fast, signing documents, checking reports, never pausing. The world might think he was cold, but in reality, he was hiding something deeper. His heart was locked away, buried under years of pain. Still, no one dared to ask. No one dared to know. At lunch hour, the office cafeteria buzzed with conversation. But one topic was always louder than the rest: the CEO. Don't ever make eye contact with him. That's what I learned on my first day, one employee warned. He doesn't care about anyone's problems. Last month, when Clara's mother was sick, he refused her leave. Said, "Work comes first." That's cruel. That's Alexander Gray. Everyone had a story. Everyone had a warning. The shadow of the CEO touched every corner of the building. People came to work with heavy hearts, not because of the tasks, but because of him. Yet something was about to change. That same week, the HR department announced that a new intern would join the company. Normally, no one cared about interns. They came, learned, and left. But this time, whispers grew louder. Poor girl, she won't last a week under him. She'll cry on her first day. Just wait. Why would anyone want to work here, knowing what he's like? The employees laughed quietly, shaking their heads. But deep inside, some felt pity. They had all been crushed by Alexander's coldness, and now it would be this intern's turn. In his private office, Alexander read the file of the new intern without emotion. Just a name, just a background. Nothing special. Nothing important. To him, she was another face in the crowd, another temporary worker who would follow the rules or leave broken. He closed the file and placed it aside, already forgetting her name. But fate had its own plan. The office clock ticked, the day dragged on, and the silence of the CEO's world continued. But outside those tall glass windows, the city was alive, moving, changing. And soon, that change would walk straight into his office. The intern was coming. And when she did, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun lit the glass walls of Gray Enterprises. Inside, the office was busy as usual. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people walking fast with files in hand. But that day, the air felt different. Whispers moved from one desk to another, carrying the same piece of news. The new intern is here. Every employee reacted the same way, shaking their heads, sighing, some even laughing softly. To them, an intern in this company was nothing more than a small candle in a storm. Especially with a CEO like Alexander Gray, who could freeze anyone with a single glance. At the reception, she stood quietly, holding a small bag and a folder with her documents. Her name was Emily Carter. She was young, fresh out of university, and her eyes carried a mix of nervousness and hope. She looked around at the tall ceilings, the shining floors, the fast-paced workers, and for a moment, she felt small. But Emily had promised herself something before coming here. No matter how cold the place, I will not give up. The HR manager greeted her politely, though with a little pity in her smile. Welcome, Emily. Let me show you your desk. As they walked through the office, Emily noticed the way people stared at her. Some offered weak smiles, others shook their heads. She even heard a whisper as she passed. Poor girl. She doesn't know what she's stepping into. Emily pretended not to hear. She kept her steps steady, her face calm. Inside, her heart was racing, but she refused to let fear win. Her desk was small, near the large glass window that gave a perfect view of the city. It was neat, almost too neat, as if no one had touched it for years. She placed her bag down and looked around. The HR manager leaned closer and whispered, "One piece of advice. Don't get too close to the CEO. He doesn't like small talk. Do your work quietly, and you'll survive." Emily nodded, though something about that warning made her curious. Why is everyone so afraid of him? By mid-morning, she was given her first set of tasks. Nothing too big, arranging files, typing reports, checking schedules. She worked quietly, focused, but she kept noticing the strange silence whenever the CEO's name was mentioned. The employees spoke his name like a shadow, careful not to say too much. At lunch, Emily joined the cafeteria. She carried her tray and sat at an empty table. Within minutes, 2 other interns joined her. They seemed friendly, but even they could not resist giving her a warning. You're new, right? You'll see for yourself soon. See what? Emily asked softly. The CEO. He's heartless. Don't expect kindness, don't expect a smile. Just stay invisible. Why does everyone say that? She asked. One of them leaned closer, whispering as if afraid someone might hear. Because it's true. Last month, an employee asked for leave to attend her brother's wedding. He told her, "Work is your only family here." She quit the next day. Emily stayed quiet, her fork frozen in her hand. She could see fear in their eyes. But instead of fear, she felt something else. Curiosity. Is he really like that? Or is there something people don't see? The day passed slowly. Emily finished her tasks and prepared to leave. Just then, her manager walked over. Tomorrow, you'll meet the CEO. He likes to personally review new interns. Her heart skipped a beat. Personally? Yes. Don't say too much. Answer only what he asks. And don't expect him to be friendly. That night, Emily lay awake in her small apartment. The city lights blinked through her window, but she could not relax. Tomorrow, she would face the man everyone feared. She thought of the stories, the warnings, the cold image of Alexander Gray. But deep inside, a voice whispered to her, "What if he is not what they say?" The next morning, she arrived early. The office was still half empty, the silence heavy. She arranged her desk neatly, double-checked her files, and kept glancing at the elevator doors. When they opened, he stepped out. Alexander Gray. He walked past rows of desks, his presence commanding silence. Employees lowered their heads, pretending to work harder. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen powerful people before, but there was something different about him. His face was sharp, his eyes cold, his steps firm. He looked like a man made of stone. For a second, his eyes moved across the office, and landed on her. Emily felt the weight of that glance. It was sharp, heavy, almost like a test. But instead of looking away, she offered a small, polite smile. To her surprise, his eyes lingered for a moment longer before he walked away. The office buzzed again, whispers rushing like waves. Did she just smile at him? She's crazy. Nobody does that. She won't last a day. Emily sat quietly, pretending not to hear. Her hands trembled slightly, but inside, she felt something strange, like she had just stepped into a story far bigger than herself. Tomorrow, she would enter his office for the first time. And tomorrow, the real story would begin. The morning was quieter than usual. The employees worked with extra care, their eyes fixed on their screens, their hands moving quickly over keyboards. Everyone knew that the CEO was in his office, and today, the new intern would meet him for the first time. Emily sat at her desk, her hands resting on a neat folder of reports. Her heart beat fast, but her face stayed calm. She could feel the stares of her colleagues. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, and some shook their heads as if already predicting her failure. The phone on her desk rang. She picked it up quickly. "Mr. Gray will see you now," the secretary's voice said flatly. Emily swallowed hard, stood up, and clutched her folder. Her feet felt heavy as she walked across the floor. Each step echoed in her ears. She reached the tall wooden door at the end of the hall, the door to the CEO's office. For a moment, she stood there, breathing deeply. "Don't be afraid. Just be yourself." She knocked gently. "Come in," a deep voice replied. Emily pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a full view of the city. The walls were lined with shelves of books and awards. A large desk sat in the middle, and behind it sat Alexander Gray. He didn't look up immediately. His eyes were on a document, his hand signing with perfect precision. The silence was heavy. Emily walked forward and stopped in front of his desk. After a moment, he raised his eyes. His gaze was sharp, cold, and distant. Many had described it before, but facing it directly was different. It felt like being struck by ice. Most people would have looked away. Emily didn't. She held her ground, her expression calm. "You're the new intern," he said. His voice was deep, controlled, without warmth. "Yes, sir," Emily replied politely. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Name: Emily Carter. Education: Business Administration, University of Crestwood. Why here?" His tone was sharp, almost like a challenge. Emily hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because this company is the best. And I want to learn from the best." For a second, something flickered in his eyes. He wasn't expecting that answer. Most people gave safe replies, career growth, or opportunity. But this girl looked straight at him and spoke with quiet confidence. "You want to learn," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Yes, sir." The silence stretched. Emily stood still, refusing to fidget. Her hands were tight around the folder, but her face stayed steady. Finally, Alexander reached out. "Show me your work." She placed the folder on his desk. He opened it, scanning the reports she had prepared. His eyes moved quickly, sharp as knives. After a long pause, he closed it and looked up again. "Acceptable," he said. Emily almost smiled, but she stopped herself. She could tell this was the closest thing to praise he ever gave. "You may go," he added, his tone final. She nodded. "Thank you, sir." She turned to leave, but before she could reach the door, his voice stopped her. "Miss Carter." She turned back. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on her in a way that unsettled her. Not cold, not cruel, something else. Something softer, buried deep. "Most people don't last here," he said quietly. "Let's see how long you do." Emily gave a small, polite smile. "I will do my best." For a moment, their eyes met again. The room was silent, but something unspoken passed between them, like a spark hidden under layers of ice. Then Alexander looked back at his papers, and the moment was gone. Emily walked out, closing the door softly behind her. The office floor buzzed immediately. Her colleagues leaned in, waiting for her reaction. "Well, what happened? Did he shout at you? Did he scare you?" Emily only smiled faintly. "He was different than I expected." The others shook their heads. "Don't be fooled. He'll show his true side soon." But Emily stayed quiet. Something about that meeting stayed with her. Yes, he was cold, yes, his eyes were sharp, but there was also a flicker, a shadow of something else. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it. That night, as she walked home, the scene replayed in her mind. His sharp words, his cold stare, and that final sentence, "Let's see how long you do." Was it a warning? A challenge? Or something more? Emily didn't know. But she knew one thing for certain, she wasn't afraid anymore. And somewhere, in his private office, Alexander sat alone. The papers on his desk were forgotten for a moment. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about the intern who didn't lower her eyes. The intern who smiled at him. It had been years since anyone had done that. For the first time in a long time, Alexander Gray felt a shift inside him, a crack in the walls he had built. The office returned to its usual rhythm after Emily's first meeting with the CEO. Yet, something subtle had shifted. People noticed it, though no one said it aloud. The intern had walked into Alexander Gray's office, faced his cold eyes, and walked out without tears. That alone was unusual. Most interns lasted a week, sometimes less. Emily was still here. Over the next days, she worked quietly at her desk. She never tried to stand out, never asked for unnecessary attention. But she worked with focus, and her small acts of kindness didn't go unnoticed. When a colleague dropped a pile of papers, she helped gather them without hesitation. When the printer broke, she stayed late to fix it, even though it wasn't her job. When the office cleaner struggled with heavy supplies, she offered a hand. People whispered, "She's too soft. She won't survive. She's wasting her energy." The CEO doesn't care about kindness. But still, she did it. Quietly, naturally, as if it was simply who she was. One evening, long after most employees had left, Emily was still at her desk. She was reviewing a report, her eyes tired but determined. The sound of footsteps echoed in the silence. She looked up and froze. It was Alexander. He didn't expect to see her there. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're still here?" "Yes, sir," Emily replied calmly. "I wanted to finish this report before tomorrow." He walked closer, his presence heavy as always. He picked up the paper from her desk and scanned it quickly. Then he looked at her. "You could have done this tomorrow." "I know, sir. But I don't like leaving work half done." For a long moment, his sharp eyes studied her. Most people avoided him, afraid of his judgment. But this girl, this intern, was different. She didn't tremble, didn't shrink. She simply answered honestly, her voice steady. Finally, he placed the report back. "Good." It was only one word, but for Emily, it felt like a small victory. The next day, something even stranger happened. During a team presentation, one of the employees made a mistake in the financial data. Normally, Alexander would have cut the person down with harsh words. But this time, before he could speak, Emily quietly corrected the error, explaining it clearly and respectfully. The room froze. Everyone waited for the explosion. But Alexander only looked at Emily for a long moment before nodding. "Continue," he said. Whispers filled the office later. "What just happened?" Did you see that? He didn't yell. Maybe he was in a good mood? No. He never changes moods. Something's different. Slowly, the impossible was happening. The Heartless CEO was showing cracks in his icy wall. It wasn't obvious. He was still strict, still cold, still distant. But those who paid attention could see it. He paused a second longer when Emily spoke. He listened when she explained things. He didn't interrupt her the way he did with others. And once, during a lunch break, an employee dropped her coffee. Normally, Alexander would have walked past without a glance. But that day, he stopped for a second, just a second, before moving on. For the office, it meant nothing. For Emily, it was proof. She could sense it. Behind those cold eyes, there was something human, something hidden. Late one evening, Emily found herself alone in the elevator. Just as the doors began to close, a hand stopped them. Alexander stepped in. The silence was heavy. Most employees would have prayed for the ride to end quickly. But Emily spoke softly. "Long day, sir." He turned his head slightly, almost surprised. "Every day is long." She gave a small smile. "Then maybe you should take a break sometimes." His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and unreadable. Nobody dared give him advice. Yet here she was, saying it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a brief moment, he didn't reply. Then the doors opened, and he stepped out without a word. Emily exhaled. Maybe she had crossed a line. But she thought she saw something in his eyes before he left, a flicker of thought, almost like doubt. That night, Alexander sat in his office long after everyone had gone. He stared at the city lights outside his window. Her words echoed in his mind. "Maybe you should take a break sometimes." No one had spoken to him like that in years. No one had dared. And for the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt unsettled. The cracks in the ice were growing. And he didn't know whether to fight them, or let them break him. The office whispered more than ever. It was impossible not to notice. Alexander Gray, the man who never bent, the man who never smiled, was behaving differently. He had not transformed overnight. He was still strict, still sharp, still powerful. But people could see the small changes. He didn't cut Emily down when she spoke. He listened. He even allowed her to correct him once during a meeting, and instead of anger, he simply nodded. The employees were confused. What was happening to the Heartless CEO? But only Alexander knew the storm inside him. Late at night, when the office was empty, he often sat in his chair staring at the dark city skyline. His mind was far from the glowing buildings. It was trapped in memories, memories he had buried long ago. Years ago, before the empire, before the icy walls, Alexander Gray had been a different man. He had been warm. He had been full of laughter. He had been in love. Her name was Claire Bennett. She was the kind of person who carried sunlight in her smile. Alexander met her in university. She was not impressed by his wealth or ambition. She cared only about his heart. And for the first time in his life, he gave it freely. They built dreams together. She supported him through struggles, encouraged him through failures, and celebrated his small victories. She was his anchor, his safe place, his reason to believe in happiness. But life is cruel. One rainy night, the phone call came. An accident. A drunk driver. A hospital. By the time Alexander reached her side, Claire's eyes were already closed forever. Something inside him broke that night. The man who had once laughed, who had once believed in love, turned to stone. He built walls higher than mountains. He told himself he would never feel that kind of pain again. And so, he erased his softer self, replacing it with the heartless CEO the world would come to know. No one in the company knew the truth. They only saw the mask he wore. To them, he was cold because he wanted power. But in reality, he was cold because warmth had almost destroyed him. And now, years later, a new intern had walked into his life. Emily Carter. She didn't remind him of Claire. She wasn't the same. But the way she looked into his eyes without fear, the way she smiled despite the silence, the way she carried kindness as if it was her nature, it shook him. He hated the feeling. Because it was the same feeling he had buried years ago. One evening, Emily stayed late again, working on a complicated report. She didn't notice Alexander standing at the doorway, watching her quietly. Her brows were furrowed, her lips pressed together in concentration. She looked so alive, so determined. For a moment, the image of Claire flashed in his mind, her sitting at a desk, laughing as she studied late into the night. His chest tightened. He turned away before Emily could notice him. But the memories followed him home. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of Claire's smile haunted him, mixed with the memory of Emily's quiet strength. He poured himself a drink, staring at the glass as if it could erase the past. But nothing could. The next morning, he arrived at work with his usual cold expression. Yet, inside, he felt the cracks growing wider. During a meeting, when an employee nervously presented a flawed idea, Alexander almost snapped, almost. But then, he caught Emily's eyes across the table. She was watching him, calm and steady. For reasons he didn't understand, his anger faded. Instead, he simply said, "Revise it." The room was shocked. Everyone expected the usual storm. Instead, they saw something else, a man who could still control his temper. After the meeting, Alexander returned to his office. He sat at his desk, staring at a photo hidden in the bottom drawer. It was the only picture he had kept of Claire. She was smiling, sunlight in her hair, life in her eyes. His hand tightened around the frame. For years, he had convinced himself that love only brought pain, that emotions were weakness, that silence was strength. But now, with every passing day, the intern was proving him wrong. He hated it. He feared it. And yet, deep inside, a part of him wanted to believe again. That evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Alexander whispered words he hadn't spoken in years. "Claire. I tried to forget. But maybe I can't." The room was empty. No one heard. No one saw. But for the first time, Alexander Gray allowed himself to feel. The office felt different that morning. People whispered quietly, noticing the subtle shift in Alexander Gray. Even the air seemed lighter, as if the building itself sensed the change. Emily walked to her desk, her heart quietly hopeful. She had no idea the impact her small acts of kindness had on the CEO. She simply worked, smiled, and tried to do her best every day. Alexander sat in his office, staring at a report, yet he barely noticed the numbers. His mind wandered, thinking of Emily, not in the way people thought about interns, but as someone who reminded him that he could still feel. That the ice around his heart could crack. The day passed with a series of small but significant events. When an employee made a mistake, Alexander didn't yell. When a meeting ran late, he offered Emily guidance instead of criticism. And for the first time, he smiled, a small, almost unnoticeable smile, but it was real. People in the office were shocked. Whispers grew louder. "Did you see him smile? Is that the CEO? I can't believe it. He actually smiled." Emily noticed too, but she didn't say anything. She kept working quietly, focusing on her tasks. She didn't seek recognition, yet her presence had shifted the atmosphere completely. Later that afternoon, Alexander called her into his office. The usual fear and tension filled the hallway as employees watched her walk inside. She knocked softly, entered, and stood before his desk. "Sit," he said, his voice calm. Emily sat carefully. She placed the folder of reports on his desk. He looked at it, then at her, and for a moment said nothing. "Miss Carter," he began and paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "You've done something no one else could. You remind me of what I've forgotten." Emily tilted her head slightly, confused. "What do you mean, sir?" He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. "I've spent years building walls around my heart. I thought I could survive without feeling. I was wrong. Emily's eyes widened, but she stayed silent, listening. You're not like the others, he continued. You see people. You see kindness. And it's made me remember that life is bigger than work, bigger than fear, bigger than control. A small smile appeared on her face. I just do what feels right. I didn't know it would affect you. He looked at her, eyes softer than they had ever been. It did. More than you know. The day after, the change became more visible. Alexander started greeting employees with nods, offering advice instead of criticism, and even allowing small moments of humor in meetings. People began to whisper not in fear, but in amazement. Emily watched silently. She had not intended to change him. She simply stayed herself, worked honestly, and treated others with respect. And in return, the CEO who had once seemed untouchable slowly opened his heart again. One evening, as the office emptied, Alexander stayed behind. He looked at the city lights, thinking of the past, of Claire, and now of Emily. He realized that he had feared feeling too much, feared being hurt. But he also realized that shutting himself away had not protected him, it had only made him lonely. He picked up a photograph of Claire from his desk drawer. She had been a bright part of his life, but life had moved forward. And now, he felt ready to move forward too, not forgetting the past, but carrying its lessons. The next day, he did something he had not done in years. He called a small meeting with his team. Everyone expected instructions, criticism, or announcements. Instead, he smiled warmly and said, "Thank you all for your hard work. I see the effort you put in, and I appreciate it. Especially the new intern. You've reminded me of what really matters. Keep doing your best, and I will do mine to support you." The employees were stunned. Some blinked, unsure they had heard correctly. Some whispered in disbelief. Emily simply looked at him, heart quietly full, knowing that her small acts had sparked something bigger than she could have imagined. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the office had completely shifted. Laughter returned in small doses. Smiles appeared on desks. Even the coffee machine seemed less intimidating. Alexander Gray was still the CEO, intelligent, powerful, decisive. But he was no longer heartless. He had learned that strength was not in fear, but in connection. Not in cold control, but in trust. And as Emily passed his office one late evening, he looked up from his desk and smiled. Not just a small, fleeting smile, but a genuine one. For the first time in years, Alexander Gray felt alive. And he knew it had all begun with an intern who dared to be herself. The world outside could continue to see him as a CEO, a man of power. But inside his office, a different story unfolded, one of hope, humanity, and the power of small, consistent kindness. And so, the man who everyone said was heartless finally understood that hearts, even broken ones, could heal. Everyone said the CEO was heartless, until the intern walked in.